person. I was supposed to be here a couple years ago, and unfortunately we had COVID. So it's wonderful just to be here in person, here at a live event and being with all of you here in Dublin. I think there's probably no bigger topic on the minds of so many people around the world when it comes to technology than the subject of digital autonomy. And this is a key discussion everyone's having all around the world. But I think, especially here in Europe, there's been quite a lot of discussion and taking a look at how do we actually accomplish these different capabilities around digital autonomy, around digital sovereignty. And so what I want to do with you over the next 20 or so minutes today is to take a look at, what are some of the key concerns, especially in very important technology areas, such as consumer devices or cloud computing, that we need to be concerned about when we actually want to achieve digital autonomy. And I want to discuss with you some proposals that we're bringing into the industry that we think could make a strong contribution to help support this area. So before I get into a lot of the key points, I just want to level set and start with a key definition of what is digital autonomy, especially here within Europe, just so that we're all talking from a similar baseline. So when we take a look at all the different discussions and all the different topics, I think there's a few key things that stand out for what does it really mean to have digital autonomy. Now, first, it doesn't mean you close your markets. We want to have a mix of foreign and local companies all together and all competing. But within Europe, what we would really like to see is that, especially for a lot of the very, very key technologies, these should ideally be developed by European companies and located here in Europe and having and supporting European values. I think here in Europe, this is what most people are concerned about and what most people would like to see. Now, right now, there's a couple of very, very important pieces of legislation in Europe that are being implemented to try to support this idea of digital autonomy. One is the Digital Market Act, and one is the Digital Services Act. And if you sort of summarize what these two pieces of legislation are about, you can sort of get the idea that the Digital Market Act is very much focused on how do we ensure fair and open digital markets. And if you take a look at the Digital Services Act, this is really much more focused on security. How do I have a safe and accountable online system? So when I start to take a look at what are the problems, especially in these areas of consumer devices and in cloud computing, it's going to be through this lens that I evaluate the situation. In the area of consumer devices, in the area of online cloud services, what is preventing us from having fair and open markets and also online security? And so with that, I'm going to start with consumer devices, and then after we go through that, I'll switch on to cloud computing. So first off, consumer devices. Now, arguably, there's no more important consumer device than the smartphone. It's been a little bit more than 10 years now since the smartphone came onto the scenes and really started to revolutionize the world as we know it today. But as amazing in a device as the smartphone is, it's really been in the last several years that we start to see the proliferation, not just of devices becoming digital with the phone, but also all sorts of other devices from an IoT standpoint. And so today, we have not just connected phones, but we have everything from connected speakers to connected TVs and tablets and all sorts of cameras and so on. And everyone is getting more and more of these connected devices in their homes, in their cars, and in their everyday environment. But there's a few big problems in terms of all these connected devices today. First off, when you take a look at all the connected devices, they all have to connect through a cloud. Even if I have one device, my TV, and it's only sitting a meter away from my phone, they have to go through a cloud connection in order to interoperate with each other. And not only that, but when you take a look at this from a performance and efficiency standpoint, it's already bad enough that they can't just talk directly to each other. They've got to connect through a cloud. But more importantly, perhaps, from a data standpoint, the fact that every single connected device has to send your data into a cloud to another device before they start to work together is a big problem. And not just the fact that they have to go through a cloud, but really there's only two cloud gatekeepers here in the market, and they're foreign cloud gatekeepers. And they have the control of all the data that's coming across from an IoT ecosystem standpoint. And furthermore, these major ecosystems of cloud gateways and cloud gatekeepers are not interoperable with each other. So you end up with all these devices. They're close to each other. They send their data to foreign clouds, and they don't work together. And this is not a very good situation, and it's certainly not digital autonomy. So what do we do about this? One of the things that we've been doing is we've created a new open source project. We just launched this last year with the open source foundation Eclipse. And this is an open source project around a distributed IoT operating system that we call Oniro. Let me tell you a little bit about what Oniro does. The first thing that Oniro does is it says, let's get rid of this concept that devices need to connect through the cloud. Instead, all the devices in an Oniro operating system connect point to point with a dynamic mesh network that they established amongst themselves. This is much more performant because the devices talk directly to each other. Perhaps even more importantly, it's much more data secure because you don't have to send your data to a third party. The devices just work together. Another really important part of Oniro, though, is the fact that we want to make sure that we have a really good experience. Today, if I'm a developer and I want to write an application for all these devices, I have to write so many different applications to different operating systems. I have to write to my phone operating system, my tablet operating system, my TV operating system, my watch operating system, and so on. For every single device, I've got to write a new application. And if I'm a developer, this is really hard, and I'm probably not going to do it, and they don't work together well. So the other key innovation of Oniro is that we have a device virtualization framework, which basically lets you take all the different attributes of an operating system on a device and say, what is a display? What is a camera? What is a speaker? And we can dynamically move that from physical object to physical object. So if I'm sitting at home, maybe I want my TV to be my smart display. If I'm sitting in my car, maybe I want my heads-up display to be my display. If I'm on the road, maybe I want to use my phone. The operating system will just dynamically move that around based on my scenario. You write one application to the Oniro operating system, and it takes care of it for you. The final key thing, though, especially around digital autonomy, is that we have open sourced this, but we've also put it under European open governance with the Eclipse Foundation. If you're not familiar with the Eclipse Foundation, they're one of the largest open source foundations in the world, and they happen to be the largest one based here in Europe. They're a Belgian AISBL. So for us, we really believe that putting it into the governance structure of an open source foundation rooted in Europe, under European legal framework, is a really good way to achieve digital autonomy, from a device standpoint. So when we start to build these capabilities from a device operating system standpoint, one of the things that we're really excited about is the ability to create brand new experiences for our users. And so today, the devices are sort of the center of everything that you do. My phone controls my experience around video conferencing. My TV controls my experience around how do I consume entertainment and so on. But with Oniro, because it's just one operating system and adapts to the different devices around you, you can move from scenario to scenario, and you can take in devices and remove devices as you wish, and the devices work around you as a person. Furthermore, if you're a small a manufacturer of something like a toaster or a kitchen appliance, and you want to build a connected device, it's very easy for you to participate in this ecosystem. There's no cloud gatekeepers. It's entirely open source. You just join the open source Eclipse Foundation, and you can start working on the project and create devices. So this is entirely open for the ecosystem to join. And finally, as the range of different devices grow, there's nothing to stop what can work together for you as a consumer. Everything becomes interoperable. So we're really excited about Oniro and the possibilities that it offers for three constituents, from a digital autonomy standpoint. One, for consumers, we just think this is a fundamentally better experience for how you deal with a lot of different digital devices. We think it's much better for the device manufacturers because they just need to worry about how do I start to interoperate with other devices, and the operating system will take care of that for me. It's entirely open for me, so I have open access to this new ecosystem. And then for the application developers, I don't have to write 10 different applications for every single device I'm trying to get onto. I just write for one operating system, and it distributes across for me. So this is the key area that we're trying to contribute around how do we start to bring a much better experience in digital autonomy from a consumer device standpoint. Let me switch gears now and talk about cloud computing, because cloud computing is arguably an even more important area as we think about digital autonomy. Now, when you take a look at cloud, it's not just here in Europe, it's all around the world. But we see all sorts of concerns around digital sovereignty, data sovereignty, both at the legislative level, but also from industry level. And so simultaneously, we'll have things like the Data Act, which tries to come from a legal standpoint to address this issue. But we also have new industry initiatives here in Europe, such as Gaia X, which are all focused on how do we deal with the fact that our market around cloud is not the way that it should be. So let's take a look at what is the state of the cloud market and why is it, and what are some of the things that we might be able to do to address the problems around digital autonomy and cloud. So first off, what is the state of the cloud market? If you take a look at the cloud market today, I think everyone would agree that the cloud market, both here in Europe and globally, is dominated by just 2 or 3 very, very large cloud providers, and then you have a handful of much smaller cloud providers all around the world. Now, the reason that these cloud providers are very, very large is not just the fact that they have the most data centers or the most money. Actually, if you take a look at these cloud providers, they offer the biggest catalog of managed services. I can go to these cloud providers, and if there's some capability I want, there's probably a service within their cloud that I can purchase, which gives me that capability. And when you take a look at the smaller clouds, they have much fewer services. So it's very difficult to go to these smaller clouds and get the same competitive capabilities as I can get from the very large clouds. Now, I think there's a couple reasons for why do we have this dynamic in this industry. And I think the reason is that we've got to think about how do we deal with the fact that we have very, very large hyperscalers, and they control all the managed services. And the reason they have this power is fundamentally 2 issues. One is something I call industry lockout. The other is what I call lock-in. Let me focus on what I mean first from a lockout standpoint and then from a lock-in standpoint. From a lockout standpoint, I mentioned that all the different cloud providers, they offer all these digital services with them. It could be an AI service or a database service or a container service or anything that you're using to build your applications. And there's this huge software ecosystem out there. There's more enterprise software sold today than there are cloud services purchased. But the problem is that these third-party software vendors cannot create native managed services within the public clouds. Only the cloud service providers themselves are able to operate managed services. Software providers have 2 pathways into the cloud. The most common way is I create a software image of my capability, and I put it into an image catalog in the cloud. Second way, I build a software as a service, and I run it on top of the cloud. But both of these are highly limited in functionality and capability compared to the native managed services in the cloud. An analogy I like to use is, if you think about the smartphone, when the iPhone first launched back in 2007, the only applications you could get on the iPhone were those launched by Apple itself. Everything else was running like a web application in the Safari web browser. That's the same situation we have with clouds today. Software vendors are running this imitation native application that looks like a web app compared to the real managed services and clouds. And it's this lockout effect that gives a lot of these cloud providers such strong power because they are the only ones who are able to offer managed services. And so this is the big problem number 1 that we have in the cloud standpoint. There's an industry lockout issue where only cloud service providers can create managed services, and the entire software ecosystem is locked out from clouds. Now, the way that a lot of enterprise customers are trying to address this is that they're all pursuing a multi-cloud strategy. The problem with going multi-cloud, though, is that services are not portable from cloud to cloud. And so it really forces you, as an enterprise user, to go least common denominator across the different clouds. If I go into AWS, for example, and I use AWS Lambda, I'm forever stuck to AWS. If I go to another cloud and I use their AI system, in, say, Azure or Google, I'm stuck there because those systems and those services are not available in other clouds. And so either I go least common denominator and I forego most of the benefits of moving towards the cloud, or I specialize this set of applications for this cloud, this set of applications for this cloud, but I'm still fundamentally locked in. And so because of the fact that services are not portable from cloud to cloud to cloud, there's no real such thing as multi-cloud, and there's basically a huge problem of service lock-in when enterprises try to adopt their clouds. Now, especially when we take a look at the issue of data sovereignty and digital sovereignty, data is perhaps the most important thing that we need to be concerned about. It's a big concern here in Europe. And one of the biggest problems with the fact that services are exclusive to service providers and they're also not portable from cloud to cloud is that when you start to write your own software on top of these services, you bind yourself and you lock yourself and your data into that particular cloud. You cannot move your application and your data into another cloud. Even if I could take all my data, for example, out of AWS Redshift and export it into Scaleway, or if I could take all my data out of Azure AI Service and I could move it into OVH, it doesn't do me much good because I have no service to process the data that I just moved to the new cloud environment. So data and the ability to process the data are tightly coupled together, and unless I have the ability to freely move both together, I am fundamentally locked in from a data standpoint. My data is going to sit in the cloud where I first start to process it, and extremely difficult to move it to another environment. So those are the two big problems that we see in the industry. Lockout from a software standpoint, lock-in from a data and from a service and a user standpoint. So what do we do about that? Well, we've launched another new initiative, also partnering, again, with the Eclipse Foundation, based here in Europe, around a project that we call Open Services Cloud. Now, Open Services Cloud is focused on how do we actually open up the new services layer within clouds so that we can start to have a real ecosystem of third-party managed services that can go from cloud to cloud to cloud. Let me explain a little bit at a high level how that works. The first thing that we are doing is that within every single public cloud, there's a layer which you operationally turn software into a managed service. These are access to capabilities for things like identity, or billing, or logging, or metering, or console access, and so on. Every cloud has them. Every cloud keeps them private to themselves. And this is the reason only cloud providers can offer managed services, and third parties cannot. So within this Eclipse working group, all of us cloud providers, we are going to open up access to this layer for the first time. This will allow third-party software vendors to come into our clouds and create a native service, no different from a first-party service that we can create. First time, you'll be able to have real third-party managed services across clouds. The second thing that we're doing is we're creating a new open source framework because we want to standardize how do we actually do this. And by creating this open source framework, any software vendor can write once against this open source framework, which defines what are the operational capabilities in cloud, and we will bind that framework into the different cloud providers. So now the software provider writes once against the framework, and he is portable across every single cloud that implements this. And so for the first time in the industry, we have real portable managed services from cloud to cloud to cloud. And so we can solve the lock-in problem as well. So we're excited about this initiative as well because we think that with Open Services Cloud, doing this in open source with the Eclipse Foundation, with the range of different software and cloud providers, we can start to really unleash portable managed services across the cloud and really address a lot of these big, big pain points that we see, both from a digital autonomy, but also from an industry standpoint. So let me put all this together. Remember at the beginning, I said that if you take a look at the Digital Market Act, the Digital Services Act, there's sort of two big lenses that we can sort of use to understand what is digital autonomy. The first is fair and open markets. The second one is basically around security. Starting with the cloud, we really think that there doesn't even exist a market around cloud services today. The cloud providers are the only ones that can offer managed services, and no one else is able to do that. So we want to create a new market for cloud services where today there does not exist one. Second, we also want to make sure it's fair and open. This is why we work the open governance and open source structure of the Eclipse Foundation. From a security and a data standpoint, by having portable managed services from cloud to cloud to cloud, you can run your applications in the cloud of your choice with the service of your choice, store your data in the region of your choice, and you can process it with as much data security and autonomy as you want. That does not exist today, and so we think this can really go a long way towards addressing a lot of these issues. Now, if we think about the device standpoint, again, the fair and open markets. Today, as I mentioned, the device market is controlled by two cloud gatekeepers. The fact our devices have to connect through the cloud to talk to each other, and these two cloud systems don't work together, we do not have an open market. And so with Oniro, the fact that we can remove that gatekeeper, the devices can directly interoperate with each other, and we do this within an open source foundation, we think can really open up the market in a way that it does not today. Finally, from a data standpoint, the fact that you don't even have to send your data to the cloud in the first place, this is much more data and digitally secure. And so these are the things that we are focused on. Let's do things together in open source. Let's do things together in a much more open way with open governance and collaborating with each other so that we can build the technologies that everyone is interested to use, that we can get the data concerns and privacy taken care of, and that we can enable all the businesses here in Ireland, in Dublin, in Europe, and all around the world to participate in this ecosystem with unfettered access. So thank you very much, and I appreciate you coming to my talk today.